about this. So I'll hand over the stage to you, and then we'll have a short Q&A session because we have one more speaker after this. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's an incredible honor to be here with all of you. My first time in India. I hope it's the first of many trips because as I told my friends, it's hard to understand how a person can fall in love with the country in 24 hours. I think I've done it. Beautiful culture here, so thank you for having me. I'm going to share a short story with you that happened 8 years ago to help get an understanding of where I hope to share with you about the power of writing, storytelling, even cafes, as we were just watching the film The Iranian Cafe, of just being able to share with one another positive stories. So about 8 years ago, I was a sailing instructor. I was running a nonprofit sailing organization in San Francisco Bay. I had a passion for water, the ocean. My grandfather and my uncles were all boat builders and sailors and racers. And it was an amazing opportunity. I found myself at the helm of a boat, a 48-foot boat, in the middle of the night, completely by myself. The others were asleep down below. It was my shift. And I was sailing in Pure Black Film Festival, the Ocean International Film Festival in San Francisco, where people who love the ocean came together. And one of the people who spoke at that festival was Dr. Sylvia Earle. She's an oceanographer. She's in her 80s. She's been diving all her life around the world, and she's been meeting with global leaders to bring attention to our oceans that are acidifying, and so many terrible things are happening. Right? We know that. And what moved me in her talk was this, which I'm going to share. This is the time to put out your writing, to share your passion. Stories, films, writing, poetry, anything you can do to manifest that love for life. Because we need that right now. For communities, for the environment, for one another. And at that point in time, I had been a struggling fiction writer for years. I put together a couple little videos that were like, I didn't even want to show anybody, but she gave me permission. That's what it felt like. And purpose, more importantly. And I went home, and maybe sometimes like others, you're trying to do something, you just scratch your head like, I don't know how to do it, and I'm not good enough. And it reminded me of an interview I gave one time with a man named Mark O'Brien who had suffered from polio. He was so disabled that he only had his head to work with. The rest of his body was encaged in a big shell that gave him oxygen to breathe, and he was in his 40s and was passionate about life. And a movie had been made of him, and I had to go talk to him about his Academy Award, actually. His film about his life had just won an Academy Award, and I was a journalist, and I got to talk to him. And in night talking with him, he looked at me dead on, and he said, there are no excuses in life to do what you want to do. No excuses. You can try to make them up, but they don't exist. You gotta go for it. So I felt like I had just received permission again. And sometimes perhaps we need that permission in order to break our own barriers that we place on ourselves. It was after that I began to look around me and go, what can I do? I don't know, I'm just a small person. I have 2 small kids, and those responsibilities, what can I do? And so I just started looking around. It's like, there's gotta be something. When all of a sudden I saw a flyer for a grant. It was a $10,000 grant. Now, not a lot of money, but I had a friend who had just sold his international business for this crazy idea to become a film director in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. Like, what kind of crazy story is that? Why throw away at age 38 a successful business to be a film director? That is a crazy, probably a stupid idea. And he heard that often. And he did it. And I thought that was so cool. I thought, that takes guts. Who has those kind of guts? And so what I did, I said, I want to give this to him. I want to say, let's make a movie. I'll produce it. And I told him, I'm going to produce it. I can probably put some of the pieces together. You're going to direct it. And, you have full creative control. You know, I wanted to give that, for me it was like I was trying to help him with a little bit of money to do something. Well, the rest of it became magic. Because this is what happens when you start something. Even if it's just a little something. We thought I'd use a 20-minute something film. We'd have a single camera that wasn't even waterproof. We would take footage of kids sailing. Because I was running an organization, I knew a lot of kids, I knew a lot of kids who sailed. And we get these kids to talk about the ocean. Well, guess what happened? An engine got started, okay? And as that engine started to get started, and we brought these kids together, and we started filming these kids, more people came to it, and they said, this is an important story, how can we help? More people gave us money. Then we made a phone call to Dr. Sylvia Earle. Now, Dr. Sylvia Earle, oh, she's big. She's a global leader in the ocean world. Why would she trust me? I've never made a film before. What do I know? I don't even know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to figure it out. I'm talking to people who do know how to do it, right? I'm not alone. So we called her up, and guess what she said? She said, yes, come and meet with me. And I felt in that moment, somebody is not only giving me permission, but they want to help me. Not me, but all of us, because it's no longer me. I'm just a part of it now. I'm humbled, okay? This is bigger than me. Well, that story continued. We finished that film, and that film went to the Tasmanian Film Festival. It went to schools and libraries, and it started to fit into school curriculums. And it was a project that I stepped back from afterwards, and I thought, how did that happen? You know, I'd never made a film before. But it was a story that needed to be told, as there are so many stories right now that need to be told. And they're there for us, right? And we're here for one another in order to help manifest those stories, to inspire us right now. After I literally physically collapsed on the living room floor, because I pretty much shifted my entire life to make that film, because I felt that is an important story. Our oceans are important, right? Life is important. Our oceans give us life. They give us oxygen. Many people don't know that. It's the plankton in the ocean that provides 80% of our oxygen, not just trees. It's an important story. But I felt, literally, I was so exhausted after that project. I collapsed on the living room floor after my kids had been eating frozen pizza for 2 months because I didn't have time enough for them, but we made it happen. And it was like, wow, that was an amazing, magical process. What do I do now? And with that, another door started to open. And I talked to people, and they said, you know, write about it. Write about it. And as I started to write about it, I began to see this world of self-published writing that is so easy to do if you love to write. The system is there for you. You don't have to go to a publisher to beg to be published anymore, you know, have the material. But there are so many networks now that help you tell your story if you have a story. And as Dr. Sylvia Earle had said, you know, this is the time to put out the poetry, put out the writing, put out the films, share the oral stories about the kind of change that we need to help each other in order to deal with this incredible hurdle that we have right now environmentally and socially, right? And as good people, that is a responsibility. So I started writing, and I began to see how there is this international online community to help you, anybody who wants to write their story, to edit, to publish, put it on Amazon.com, which I'm not going to suggest is the greatest platform, but it's there, accessible right now. Use it, right? And, you know, we have made it so difficult in the past, waiting for somebody to open the door for us in the writing world, in the book world, and I did bring a copy of my book, because it was, it's called, I'll share that now, it's called Redemption, How Ronald Reagan Nearly Ruined My Life. Actually, nearly ruined yours too, and I'll share that in a minute. Because as after I collapsed on the floor and I was recognizing not only the film project, but then also this writing that I was doing was my own story that I hadn't recognized in my past, as you have many stories to share too. It was a political story, which I had now understood what drove me so passionately to make that film, aside from just giving the funds to my friend in LA. but it was that I had lost my childhood dream when I was 13. I had wanted to study oceanography. I've always loved the ocean. It's where my parents, they didn't have a lot of money. They took us to the beach. That's where we got to play and enjoy life. And it was in 1981 that I suddenly remembered, that I had completely forgotten for years, the night, August 3rd, 1981, that I waited for the FBI to come arrest my father. That was the government. My father had taken a stand in the 1981 National Union strike against President Ronald Reagan to demand political honesty. Okay? 21,000 families, literally, and most of the guys were they were air traffic controllers. They literally put us kids and the wives on the front line, on the strike lines. Were willing to risk everything they had to demand political honesty. And they were fired in 48 hours. My dad was labeled a federal criminal. And we had hard years after that. Because when the government comes after you, there's nobody who's going to save you. And we felt that. And it's part of American history that even most Americans don't even know today. But that trauma suddenly triggered me again in today's world, right? And because we're dealing with some of those same kind of issues politically in many countries. And it was like, wow, that was the last great act of solidarity, non-violent. There was absolutely no violence. And I began to understand the responsibility. Again, and that was about community, right? And about unity. So, another idea began to brew. It's like, what does it take for us to come together as people who love the arts, as people who love the stories? How do we create another story in order to bring people together? And that was when another door opened. You ask the question, and it's like the answer is there for you. Okay? And in this case, that was true. And I had met a guitarist named Jose Neto. He's a Brazilian guitarist who I really knew nothing about. And I had met him at a little cafe. We got talking just randomly. I learned he played the guitar, and then I asked him, "Oh, do you play around here?" He said, "I play with Steve Winwood." Now, Steve Winwood is a huge international name, and when you say that, you spring out big names, suddenly people change their demeanor. Because it's like they want to be with the famous person. I actually didn't have that interest. I was trying to understand why a guitarist was in this little humble cafe all by himself at the time. What are you doing here? You're like a top dog. Why are you here in this little cafe? But he is a very humble person. And that was when I began to construe this last film. Because I began to recognize maybe there's another kernel of story in here about musicians and artists, as we are in this room, coming together in order to unite, bring the stories together to create hope and inspiration, right? And the power of art to heal all of us. Because every country, every community has music, has a diversity, and has that international language that we can all tune into together. So we embarked on that. Again, I had no money. Started asking around. Now, I don't like asking for money. I don't know about you guys, but I actually am very embarrassed by it. But what happens when you do that, as I began to understand, being a very shy person, is that you're opening the door for that other person to be generous. Okay? And you're giving them the opportunity to join a bigger mission. So it's as you are giving them a gift. Now that was not something easy for me to understand in the beginning, right? Because for me, to ask for money, it's like, well, I'm not asking for money. I'm opening a door for them to join something bigger than all of us, okay? And that's what happened. And I went and talked to a woman in my community whose husband you might have heard the name of, maybe not, but Carlos Santana. He's one of the top guitarists in Europe and United States. And I met his ex-wife and told her the story about this guitarist that I wanted to make a film. And guess what she did? She said, "I want to seed that project." I didn't even ask. And And the moment she gave me, again, it was like a permission. And I don't want to say that because sometimes you have to do things without permission. But when somebody gives you that kind of responsibility, right, and that kind of trust, whichever side you're on, it emboldens you. It gives you so much more courage within yourself, right? Or if you're on the other hand, if you give that money to somebody else, and if you're in that position that you can do that, you light the fire, right? It's powerful. We all have the capacity to do that. And anyway, that became a 5-year project. And that project was all based on trust, without money at all. And I began to see through that part of the journey, so I'm really talking about the journey of this, is how trust and supporting one another just completely are the building blocks to bigger projects than ourselves, right? As this last project became. So I'm going to back up just a little bit because I took all of that I had done with the book and the film projects, and they were great to do, really wonderful to do, and a lot of lives changed, as my life did too. But what does it all mean? And is there another thread that could be included with those projects to build it even more? And that is, I guess, when somebody called me an impact producer. And I asked, what is that? And they said, it's when you can add to your film or to your book another project that gets the community involved and opens the doors for them. So I started thinking about it, and as we're going through our political upheaval and people in my country, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of rage, a lot of division. What is the thread of hope, right? There's a lot of anger and people saying, oh, that's bad, I hate that person, whatever. It's also negative. What is the positive path? And the positive path was I began to recognize that the leader, president prior to Reagan, is still alive. President Jimmy Carter. He's been forgotten. I don't know if you know who he is or heard anything about him, but it was like, oh my gosh, this guy is still alive. Nobody talks about him. And I started to dig in, and I began to realize not only had he been trying to deal with climate change in the late 1970s, some history that most people have forgotten today, but that he was humble and simple and generous and kind and peaceful and has tried to live the best life of integrity. And I thought, why are we not celebrating him, right? So I had my book, I had the film, and so I started producing events to celebrate him in an effort to bring in more people into the project. Okay, so there are like 3 different legs of this: the film, the book. I started contacting political leaders to write proclamations and resolutions in honor of this president. I started to create events of dancing and music in order to bring up the education about him. And then this can be about any person, right? I'm just choosing or sharing what I did. But it was an event in order to bring more people into that story, okay? And for them to feel like they are participating and that they're just not watching. And when you get people involved in that, you see how their light begins to get lit up, right? They feel valuable. They feel like they get to participate and be part of the big story. That's the bigger story. So last October, we threw an event. We had actually a host from our ABC network, which is a national network, come and honor our president. He didn't come. He was invited, but he couldn't come. And it was something that got shared on the radio. It's something that became a plaque of resolution from our California legislature. And it went off to the president. And with that learning that I went through, I began to understand, isn't that the gift that we can all do as storytellers, right? Is how do you give the permission? Because sometimes people need that permission. Sometimes they lack that own self-confidence, right? how do you open up that door for them to jump into that bigger story that you're trying to create? That story of inspiration, that story of activism on a positive level in order to manifest social change. This October, we've launched, since President Jimmy Carter's birthday is in October 1st, actually, we have now dedicated the entire month to his birthday. And what we've also done is incorporated the people that we respect today, not in the past, but today, who we can honor as either storytellers, as activists, as environmentalists, as whatever they might do when they're not being celebrated today. A platform for them to celebrate positive activism, social justice, environmentalism, anything that is positive today into manifesting change. And I did bring bumper stickers for you. I was told to make this interesting, so I thought, well, I do have a little gift here, but I think we've actually created these Happy Birthday President Jimmy Carter bumper stickers, which you are all invited to have if you'd like. So through that story of my own that I shared, solar and wind energy in the late 1970s, and she looked at me with this sense of horror of how did that happen 40 years ago and we aren't talking about it? How is it possible? When she looked at me that way, she was probably 17, 16, thinking next generation, the kind of responsibility I felt for her world that she's coming into was so overwhelming. And having 2 kids myself, I realized there are no excuses right now. And that's really when I kind of stopped my life that I was living a different way, full throttle. In the words of Mark O'Brien, there are no excuses, just went so deep in me. I think what happens though is when you start an engine, right? When you start a project, you realize it's not you, right? I mean, you're part of it. But what happens is you start to meet other people who start to inspire you. When we were doing this documentary about the guitarist, that guitarist inspired me. He's a true artist, old school in the way where he goes with feeling, right? It's all about what feels right. Not even what should be right, it's more about what feels right. And he's a true, music genius, but the artist as well. So to answer your question, I think once you start that, you start to find the people who actually inspire you to keep going. Yeah.
Barbara, what was the toughest part while executing once you've taken up this project? To start to finish, what was the toughest part for you?
So who started the project?
No, once you started the project,
Yeah.
so there is a different level to finalize the project, for the final product.
Yeah.
What was the toughest part for you?
I give so much credit to our film director in the UK, Richard Michael. He kind of took my mess and put it together because when we started the project, we really didn't know what we were doing. We had tried a couple of different film directors. My original friend I brought in, he wasn't right for the project. We brought in another person to direct. I was the producer. I thought maybe I could direct, but I knew I was not the right person to direct. I didn't know why then, but now I look back, it was more important for somebody who really knew him and also understood his music on a different level. In order to tell his musical story properly. For me, my agenda was a little different than telling his music and understanding his music as a musician. So the film director is also a musician and is very deeply involved with music concerts and the music international scene. So I couldn't intellectualize it then, I could only feel it then. Okay. But now I look back and that was the reason. So, but we just started. I had my camera. We used whatever we had. We had a little bit of money, so we were able to fly to New York. I was able to interview Harry Belafonte, which was incredibly moving. That was another moment that inspired me. Because the moment you interview those kind of people who have moved culture, you suddenly realize it's a responsibility to finish, right? You have to do this no matter what. You got to figure it out, and you can figure it out. So after we had pulled together all the different footage and all the different interviews, we kind of did a dump, sadly, on Richard Michael, which also showed his integrity because he figured it out and he was able to bring it together. And we brought in a couple more people to help finesse it, a couple of consultants, and then finalize the film on the best level that we possibly could with that budget. Yeah. And we're still trying to figure it out, you know, the distribution.
Barbara, I also wanted to know, while you were making this film, the man behind the violin, since it involves so much of music, so by the time you finish this film, how music grew in you? Did you know more about music now? Or are you more oriented into music? It may have touched you somewhere now.
Yeah. It's a little small story in that too. When I was a teenager, I worked in a music store.
Okay.
I loved world music.
Okay.
I loved it. I worked in an independent music store where I fell in love with world musicians and imports and anything that was outside my, very tiny place, which was becoming very commercialized. And it was my escape from my dad's political stuff. It was my sanctuary. Well, a corporation came in, bought that music store, and I physically had to remove all my favorite music because they weren't the big money makers. And that was an incredible loss for me as a kid, and I was so angry about that.
Did you make up?
So this was a very healing project for me.
So you made up?
Yeah, I made up for it. It was, there's a bit of a, fuck you, I'm sorry to say, to the corporations because they stole that beauty from me when I was a kid, let's say. I was trying to support them for a better platform, too.
So an ocean of music was there around you.
Yes, yes.
Alright, so we'll have to cut that short now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.